This Sunday after Mueller, President Trump.
No collusion, no obstruction.
And his allies.
Really the best day since he got elected.
Claimed total victory with the release of the Mueller report. But the report paints an unflattering picture of the president and his campaign and lays out a pattern of obstruction, prompting Mr. Trump to bash the report with a profanity. And Democrats demand to see the whole document and the underlying evidence.
We will subpoena that entire report today.
My guest this morning, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Gerald Nadler, and the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Plus, the impeachment debate. Some Democrats argue the time is now.
This isn't about politics. This is about principle. And that's why I've asked the House to start impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump.
While others worry that the issue divides Democrats and unites Republicans.
The avenue is not impeachment. The avenue is further disclosure to the American people.
And look who's running. Joe Biden, ahead in the polls, is launching his campaign this week. But previous frontrunners often fail to win their party's nomination. How much does polling mean at this early stage of the race? Joining me for insight and analysis are NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Hallie Jackson, Joshua Johnson, host of 1A on NPR, Amy Walter, National Editor of the Cook Political Report, and Jonah Goldberg, Senior Editor of National Review. Welcome to Sunday. It's Meet the Press.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running show in television history. This is Meet the Press with Chuck Todd.
Good Sunday morning. We're going to get to the Mueller report in a moment, but there was a terrible series of terror attacks in Sri Lanka on this Easter morning. The coordinated attacks across the country targeted Christian worshipers celebrating Easter in churches and high-end hotels that are frequented by foreign tourists. The death toll is going to number into the hundreds. The attacks broke a long period of peace in Sri Lanka, which has endured decades of civil war, which had come to an end, or supposed end. Turning now to the Mueller report. In so many ways, the rollout reflected the divisions in this country. It was a tale of two reports, or more accurately, two tales of one report, with a divided public free to choose its version of the truth. On one hand, there was President Trump and his supporters high-fiving, celebrating with the help of the president's new attorney general who framed the report before its release as an exoneration of a frustrated and angry president. On the other hand, there was the report itself, which at 448 pages, including many redactions, is a far cry from the president's favorite misleading no collusion, no obstruction soundbite. It describes a campaign eager to accept the help of a hostile foreign power, Russia, and a president who later worked furiously to obstruct the investigation. In fact, Mr. Trump may have been saved from a formal obstruction charge by aides who saved him from himself. The Mueller team writes, the president's efforts to influence the investigation were mostly unsuccessful, but that is largely because the persons who surrounded the president declined to carry out orders or accede to his requests. Then there is this now iconic closing sentence. While this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. It's a line that gives ammunition to both sides of the Trump divide, but one that is likely to cloud the president's reputation whether or not he is reelected.
We need the whole report, including the underlying documents, unredacted.
The 448-page report details an aggressive and ultimately successful attempt by Vladimir Putin to interfere in the 2016 election and destabilize the United States.
I have nothing to do with Russia.
I know from having been on the campaign that there was no contact with Russians, no discussion with Russians.
But the report lays out scores of links between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. Among them, campaign chairman Paul Manafort regularly shared polling data with a Russian intelligence agent and received a peace plan for Ukraine that Manafort acknowledged to the special counsel's office was a backdoor way for Russia to control part of eastern Ukraine. Then there are the ties between the Trump campaign and WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks! I love WikiLeaks.
The report details advanced knowledge of WikiLeaks releases by members of the campaign, including the president, who is described as taking a phone call and then telling Deputy Campaign Chair Rick Gates that more releases of damaging information would be coming. There was the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting, when Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort met with Russians to get dirt on Hillary Clinton. And remember this.
To be clear, Mr. Trump has no financial relationships with any Russian oligarchs.
That's what he said. That's what I said. That's obviously what our position is.
In fact, there were many contacts. arranged at the highest levels, including a meeting in the Seychelles Islands between the head of Russia's sovereign wealth fund and Trump ally Eric Prince. On obstruction, Mueller lays out 10 possible episodes, including the firing of FBI Director James Comey, the president's attempt to get Attorney General Jeff Sessions to unrecuse himself.
He took the job, and then he said, I'm going to recuse myself. I said, what kind of a man is this?
And telling White House counsel Don McGahn to fire Mueller. McGahn refused, telling then Chief of Staff Reince Priebus that the president had asked him to do crazy ass. McGahn threatened to resign. In fact, the day Mueller was appointed, May 17, 2017, President Trump, quote, slumped back in his chair and said, oh my God, this is terrible. This is the end of my presidency. I'm effed. Adding later, this is the worst thing that ever happened to me. Though the Attorney General claims
the White House fully cooperated with the special counsel's investigation.
In fact, the report details how individuals lied or deleted communications, and the president refused to sit for an interview with the special counsel. President Trump responded to written questions with some version of I do not recall or I do not remember 37 times. Now, some Democrats are pressing for impeachment proceedings.
We have a Constitution of the United States, and it says when a president engages in this kind of activity, then it's time for impeachment.
But House Democratic leaders, led by Speaker Nancy Pelosi, are putting the brakes on, saying one step at a time.
The avenue is not impeachment. The avenue is further disclosure to the American people.
And joining me now is the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. Mr. Mayor, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you. Thank you, Chuck.
Let me start with some of the frontline conclusions from the report itself, which is square one. The first one is this. The Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systemic fashion. Do you and the president accept that as a fact from this report?
We do. Why? There's no reason not to accept it.
And the president accepts it as well.
I'm sure he does.
All right. The next fact they put in here is this one. The special counsel's investigation established that Russia interfered in the 2016 presidential election principally through two operations. First, a Russian entity carried out a social media campaign that favored presidential candidate Donald J. Trump and disparaged presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. Do you and the president accept the idea that the Russian interference was designed to help President Trump?
I believe it was. I can't tell you for sure. I mean, I haven't examined all that evidence, but
Does
I have
the president accept that?
No reason to dispute it. I think he does, but I haven't really. I mean, obviously, that wasn't part of defending him. So
no, but a lot of the report seems to indicate that he feared that the idea the Russians helped him was going to delegitimize his presidency.
You know, whether he did or he didn't, I think that it's quite clear that there were a lot of factors that go into any election. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that he was elected president. There are a lot of good reasons why he was elected president, and she was not elected president, that have nothing to do with this. And it's hard to believe that this was a decisive factor. And they don't find that.
Let me put in this. The report does say this.
Did all that happen?
Yeah.
I imagine it did. I mean, I can't dispute it.
Okay, let me put up this one. A Russian intelligence service conducted computer intrusion operations against entities, employees, and volunteers working on the Clinton campaign and then released those stolen documents. You totally agree, and the president accepts that the Russians did this operation and it was designed to hurt Hillary Clinton and in turn help Donald Trump.
Without the details, I haven't examined all the details, and I do find in other parts of the report that there are substantial inadequacies, either in putting forth other testimony that makes it false or other versions. Assuming that that's a straight analysis, I can't object to it.
Okay, well, let me go through. Again, this is on the first 2 pages of this report. This additional fact that they declare. The investigation established that the Russian government perceived it would benefit from a Trump presidency and worked to secure that outcome, and that the campaign expected it would benefit electorally from information stolen and released through the Russian efforts. It's this last part.
Yeah,
the campaign knew that the Russians were helping and were waiting to
I was on the campaign for 4 months, probably as close to Donald Trump as anybody could be. I saw no evidence of that. So that one I'd have to examine much more critically. I saw no evidence of anybody talking about Russia, involved with Russia. And one of the reasons why I volunteered to defend him was I knew personally it was a false allegation.
Then why did the president trumpet WikiLeaks so many times?
Because they were putting out things that were true and very, very damaging to Hillary Clinton. Of course you would want things that are...
And you knew this was... But you at the time even sort of knew that these were stolen by foreign folks.
I did not. I knew WikiLeaks had them. It'd be like the Pentagon Papers. I mean, Pentagon Papers was stolen. They were stolen from the Department of Defense. My God, that's horrible.
This is a foreign adversary, though. This is a foreign adversary. Someone who.
What's the difference between a spy and a foreign adversary?
One works for the United States of America and one doesn't.
Well, wait a second.
Doesn't one work for the United States of America and one doesn't?
Stealing classified documents is theft. Now, there were overriding reasons for it, but it's still theft. Legally, it's the same thing. Morally, it's the same thing. And the reality is, here's the thing that's really interesting about it, and I don't want to dispute this too much, but everything they put out about Hillary Clinton was true. In other words, they didn't make things up. They shouldn't have stolen it. But the American people was just given more information about how deceptive, how manipulative her people and her campaign were. In other words, if the Russians had stolen the information, and it showed Hillary Clinton to be just a wonderful person and everybody was fine, they were all honest, they were all terrific, it would have helped her. If it hurt her at all, it only hurt her because the American people got information that was gotten in the wrong way, but it all was true.
Republicans
all that stuff that backfired on her.
But in 2016, I'm just curious. In 2016, the intelligence services knew that WikiLeaks was not a journalistic enterprise anymore. It may have started that way, that it was serving as a front for essentially foreign adversary intelligence dumps.
Right.
Why did the president think it was ethical to essentially trumpet what WikiLeaks was doing?
Well, if I'm even in law enforcement, if I'm running an investigation and all of a sudden evidence is given to me about the criminality of the person I'm investigating, even if it comes from a questionable source, I'm going to use that information. And there was nothing to suggest that this was manufactured evidence. Everything printed about.
But does it bother you at all that a foreign adversary wanted to manipulate our election?
Absolutely.
So why participate in helping in their manipulation?
Nobody's participating in it.
Trumpeting WikiLeaks is participating in it.
No, it is not. It is not. That's not at all participating in it. That is like the guy who drops. I tell you, in the middle of this investigation, my co-counsel received 4 documents that indicated that the special counsel was using exceedingly unethical tactics in trying to get Jerome Corsi to testify. Now, I don't know where they came from. I went to the FBI. I gave them to the FBI, and then we used those documents. I didn't steal them. I didn't take them. And it turns out they came from a legitimate source. But the reality is, when you get information about your opponent, and it's true,
even if it comes from a foreign entity.
In fact, I wonder if
even if it comes from a foreign entity.
I wonder if there isn't an argument.
Why didn't Donald Trump Jr. call the FBI when the Russians offered dirt on Hillary Clinton?
I wonder if there isn't an argument that the people had a right to know that information about Hillary Clinton. People had a right to know that Hillary Clinton and the people around her were as dishonest, as deceptive, as duplicitous as they actually are.
Well, why not run an honest political campaign depicting that?
Well,
why use a foreign adversary? Why use a foreign adversary stolen?
But actually, you're now
Donald Trump Jr.
Chuck, you're now
accepted the WikiLeaks.
I let you read all that, but I noticed you didn't read that there was no evidence of collusion with the Russians by Trump or anyone on the Trump campaign. There was no involved. Wait.
But they wanted to. Should that bother Americans? They wanted to?
Oh, my goodness. If somebody on the campaign wanted to do something wrong, a lot of people on Hillary Clinton's campaign wanted to do something wrong. The legal standard that makes it possible that we're not going to be prosecuted for our thoughts is every single line there. We go right to the fact that did Trump or anyone from the Trump campaign participate in the dissemination of hacked material? And the answer is no. It had already been disseminated. So he is free, clear of an allegation. This investigation wasn't nationwide news, international news for 3 years because the Russians tried to invade our election. They've done that before. We just caught them this time. And other countries do it, by the way. The real news here is Donald Trump conspired with the Russians to do this, making him almost a traitor. That turns out after 2 FBI investigations, counterintelligence 7 months, this one 13 months, not true.
Why isn't the president angrier at the Russians? Why isn't the president angrier at the Russians? Why is he so angry at Bob Mueller? Why is he so angry at Don McGahn?
Because they
Why
tried to
is he
frame
angry
him.
at the Russians?
Because
the Russians are the ones that have created the impression that his election was illegitimate.
Why wouldn't you be angry at someone who tried to frame you for a crime and accused you of treason when it is absolutely untrue? Why aren't you as interested right now? We've spent a lot of time on this.
I'm not finished.
But why aren't you now interested in how is it that 2 investigations proved these charges were false? And nobody is investigating who started the investigation. Isn't that a horrible thing? Do you think maybe they were manipulating the election? Also, do you think that Papadopoulos getting that information from a Maltese ambassador or Maltese undercover guy, do you think that was accidental? Come on. American intelligence.
So you really think this, but you're painting generated this idea that the Russians hacked and stole this material? The Russians, these are facts.
I'm not saying they didn't.
Okay, but you are creating, you're going off into another direction here.
No, I'm not. I'm going into the following direction. Any responsible prosecutor other than Mueller would have followed. When you find out that the allegation is untrue about the man you've been investigating, you turn around right away and you investigate how did it happen. I've had investigations like that. I had one during the Knapp Commission where 2 police officers were being falsely accused. When I found out they were falsely accused, I found out the reason why they were falsely accused. Mueller has no interest in that. He has no interest in the fact that the people at that meeting on June 9 that is written about all the time, they met with the head of GPS, which is the company that was promulgating the Steele dossier, the day before, the day of, and the day after.
GPS told Donald Trump Jr. to say, if it's what you say it is regarding Hillary Clinton dirt, then I love it.
Nobody's told them to say that. But who set up the meeting? An operative from GPS.
An operative from GPS or an operative from the Russian Kremlin? From the Russian government?
Well, who knows? Vesnelskaya. You let me answer the question?
Yeah.
Would you like to know the truth or just one side of the truth? Vesnelskaya was represented by Glenn Simpson, who's the head of GPS, for 3 years. They met the day... Wait, please. It's complicated. It's not just one fact. They met the day before the meeting with Donald Trump Jr., spent hours together having dinner. They met the morning of the meeting with Donald Trump Jr., and they met the day after. They had set up the meeting on the grounds that it was about dirt on Hillary. They never spoke about dirt on Hillary. They spoke about Russian adoptions. And then they never followed up. To me, having been involved in the Justice Department for 17 years, that's about as clear a possible setup as you can get.
Why did Donald Trump Jr. embrace the idea that Russians could have dirt on Hillary Clinton?
Why did the special prosecutor come to the conclusion that that was not an obstructive act? It wasn't obstruction. That particular one, he clears them of completely because he's very embarrassed. He knows that he didn't follow up on all the suggestions. It was a setup. And that's why this was a one-sided investigation. But the biggest takeaway of all is, where's the interest now in trying to figure out how could it be that the FBI investigated this in 2 separate investigations, used 4 wiretaps in order to do it, 4 electronic surveillances, talked to 500 witnesses, spent $40 million. And the answer is there was not the slightest bit of evidence of conspiracy between Trump, anyone on the Trump campaign, and the Russians. That was the story, not this stuff, which is underneath
So it is now okay for political campaigns to work with material stolen by foreign adversaries?
Well, it depends on the stolen material. If the stolen material is, first of all, was it all right for the New York Times and the Washington Post to print against the objections
of the president? You're putting the Pentagon Papers and Vladimir Putin on the same level of morality?
The theft. How often have newspapers and you covered stolen classified material?
I hope not often.
Well, you do.
I hope not often, to be honest.
You do, and you justify it. And you actually, I don't know if NBC was part of it, but the media went to court to defend doing that because it's part of the public's right to know. But I guess the public didn't have a right to know how sneaky, how dishonest, and how dishonorable Hillary and the people around her were.
Let me ask you something. You keep bringing up Hillary Clinton. You said something very interesting during the campaign about Hillary Clinton and the FBI interview that she was a part of. You said this. She claims 37 times to the FBI she can't remember things. This has to be a lie. Otherwise, she has such a bad memory. She should really be going somewhere for memory lessons, not running for president of the United States. And the questions that you helped the president answer of the special counsel, you used some form, or the president uses some form of not recalling or not remembering. I think the number was 37 times.
I think it was 22 times, but in any event. And Jim Comey did 201 times. And it wasn't I don't remember all the time. I have to count that I don't remember. It's to my best recollection. Mm-hmm. I will never let a witness answer a question.
So he wasn't as forthcoming as he could be. The president was not as forthcoming as he could have been.
He was as forthcoming as the question demanded. I don't allow any witness to volunteer. It's a terrible thing to do. And that's the way they trap you for perjury. I'll give you an example. The president says that the events described by Michael Cohen, the correct version is the first one he gave under oath, not the second. Michael Cohen is about as big a liar as I've ever seen. I could rip him apart on a witness stand. The guy lied on television. The guy lied in the last hearing before the Congress, and when he said, I didn't ask for a job.
Do you represent the most truthful client you've ever had in Donald Trump?
I represent probably the most important client I've ever had with regard to the future of the United States, yes, because he's been, I think, a great president.
Do you feel like he's truthful?
I believe he's truthful, yeah, as much as you can be in a world in which every single word you say is picked apart. And if you say 4 and it's actually 5, they claim you're lying.
I want to get you to respond to another part of this. If we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. Based on the facts and the applicable legal standards, however, we are unable to reach that judgment. This is not an exoneration by Mueller.
Why did you read all of the harmful things to the president there when about 80% of that is helpful on obstruction? It finds that he was an innocent man. He was an innocent man.
Don McGahn saved him. Why is the president angry?
Don McGahn didn't save him.
Don McGahn didn't carry out an obstruction and saved him.
He could have fired Mueller. He had a perfect right to fire Mueller. Mueller, at that time, he had several good reasons to fire Mueller. Mueller had substantial conflicts of interest. He had hired a staff that was so prejudiced, it shocks any prosecutor who's fair. He hired a person who was the chief counsel to the Clinton Foundation to investigate Donald Trump. My God, if I were investigating Hillary Clinton and I hired the person who ran the Trump Foundation, I think the media would go nuts on me. So that was a legitimate reason to want to fire Mueller for a very, very bad judgment. Remember, he's the president of the United States. Mueller is not an independent counsel. Mueller works for the Justice Department. He could have been fired at any moment. And unless you could show that he wasn't going to replace him with somebody to take over the investigation like he did with Comey, you'd have no obstruction. He could have fired him.
So you don't believe Don McGahn saved the president?
I don't believe
History will not.
Absolutely not.
It saved him from an obstruction of justice charge that
in
would
fact,
have been taken up by
in
Congress.
one circumstance, Don McGahn gives 3 versions of the facts, one of which is perfectly innocent, and the special prosecutor or special counsel decides to use another version.
We are
really sloppy. That entire report, and the way you just presented it, is all from the point of view of let's see if we can hang Donald Trump. And also the standard of proof they used. Go to page 2 of the obstruction thing. Mm-hmm. The president's got to prove he's innocent. They have to be convinced that he didn't do it. When is that the standard ever in America? How can you prove a negative? That has to be pointed out and never used again, because innocent people will get tarred and feathered with this. And now the question should be, for anybody who wants justice, how did this happen? Who started it? And I think you may find that the Clinton campaign may have interfered in this election even more than the Russians did.
It's an undefended accusation. I can't get into it now. Very quickly,
Barack Obama, it says, or at least it raises the specter with 2 texts between Strzok and his girlfriend. They say the Obama people are keeping in close touch with this. That's the execution of the Steele dossier.
It could also be that the Russian government is
Why do you
infiltrating.
laugh? But why do you laugh
How
that
do you
away?
not know that it?
But why do you laugh that away?
Because you're making an assumption that it's some nefarious thing.
I'm not making an assumption.
Why wouldn't the government?
I was in the government.
Why wouldn't the government be concerned about Russian interference?
And why wouldn't the government be concerned about an investigation opened up right after you clear Hillary Clinton on Donald Trump based on 7 words that was said to Papadopoulos that don't even suggest a possible crime? It says Russians have dirt on Hillary Clinton. At that point, it didn't say stolen, it didn't say taken, and nothing connects it to Donald Trump. Why didn't they go tell him that this was a problem, like they did with Feinstein when she had a Chinese communist spy working for her? Let me finish. They told her she had a spy working for her. Trump didn't have a spy working for him. Trump turns out to be totally innocent. There was no evidence to suggest
angry at the Russians.
Because the Russians didn't try to frame him. He's angry at the Russians for interfering in the election. But he's a lot angry at the people who tried to take away his presidency based on a plan done by Strzok, prevent and remove, and you guys avoided the slightest little evidence about Trump. Boom. This is real evidence. It's real evidence that the Steele dossier is phony, that it was a fraud on the court.
The Steele dossier barely mentioned in the Mueller report, for what it's worth. I think this has been
for good reason.
A little hype.
But you make my point. For good reason. Because it makes him innocent. Anything that makes him innocent is ignored by the report. And something like the Steele affidavit, in which 4 people signed under oath and never gave the court the information about it.
You have 2 other interviews to get you to.
I do.
So I have to let you go.
And there's a big investigation to come. I hope you cover it.
You want Bill Barr to start a new investigation?
Do I want him to?
Yes.
I've wanted a new investigation for a year.
You think he'll do it?
I hope so. Justice requires it. They tried to frame the President of the United States, including...
You think Bob Mueller tried to frame him?
No. I think the people making the allegations and who started it, I think Mueller was derelict in not investigating that. A prosecutor is supposed to entertain the hypothesis that the person is innocent. This man was incapable of entertaining that. Otherwise, he would have looked at the other side. How did this happen? 2 investigations, no collusion, not a coincidence. How did it happen? Happy Easter.
Happy Easter, Mr. Mayor. Whew. Well, when we come back, I'll be joined by the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, Gerald Nadler of New York, who is calling for the release of both the unredacted report and all of the underlying evidence. That is next. Welcome back. The battle over the Mueller report is far from done. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Gerald Nadler issued a subpoena on Friday seeking the full unredacted version of the report. In addition to Bill Barr, Nadler wants Robert Mueller, among others, to testify before his committee. So joining me now is the Judiciary Committee Chairman, Gerald Nadler. Congressman, welcome back to Meet the Press, sir.
Good to be here.
Let me start before I get your reaction to some of Mr. Giuliani, let me just start with something from the Mueller report and curious your reaction to it. On obstruction, this is what Mueller writes. Congress can validly make obstruction of justice statutes applicable to corruptly motivated official acts of the president without impermissibly undermining his Article 2 functions. Did you read that as a directive to Congress that basically the call is in your court, not Bill Barr's?
No, I believe that is already the law, and that that sentence is part of an explanation of why he essentially disagrees with Attorney General Barr's wild, far-out legal theory that the president cannot commit obstruction of justice no matter what he does because he is the head of the Justice Department. And he's saying that Congress can make corruptly motivated acts by a president or by anybody in the executive branch a crime, and it has. Unless you think that Barr is right, and almost no lawyer thinks he's right, in saying a president is immune from that as long as he does his official powers, right, he can do anything. That's like saying that a member of Congress has a right to vote for or against the Farm Bill. It's true, but if you vote for the Farm Bill or against it because someone gave you a bribe, that's an obstruction of justice and bribery. The president's no different.
Well, let me read you this part, though, because I do think this is the complicating factor, all this. Also from the report. Unlike cases in which a subject engages in obstruction of justice to cover up a crime, the evidence we obtained did not establish that the president was involved in an underlying crime related to Russian election interference. Although the obstruction statutes do not require proof of such a crime, the absence of that evidence affects the analysis of the president's intent and requires consideration of other possible motives for his conduct. They go on to state that whether you think it's distasteful or not, a political motivation, meaning the president concerned about his political standing, might not be an illegal reasoning behind sort of having concern about this case.
No. The Mueller report goes on to state that there may be other considerations that are not crimes that nonetheless are predicates for an obstruction of justice, and that happens all the time to save your reputation for other reasons. What Mueller says, and this is where Barr deliberately, or one of the places where Barr deliberately misled the American people, what Mueller says is that although a thorough FBI investigation might very well show the evidence of obstruction of justice by the president, we're not going to do that because of the Department of Justice legal opinion that a sitting president cannot be indicted, and it would be unfair to lay out the facts justifying an indictment without giving the president the opportunity in a trial to clear his name. So because of that legal doctrine, we're not going to charge him with obstruction. Barr misinterpreted that, or misrepresented that, I should say, to say that they didn't find obstruction. There is plenty of evidence of obstruction, and they say in so many words, if we pursued this, we might put ourselves in an impossible position because we would then have to charge the president with a crime, which the Justice Department won't permit us to do.
Do you assume that the reason Bob Mueller did not charge anybody with conspiracy with the Russians is because he has found that no conspiracy took place, or that he didn't have enough evidence to sustain a conviction? And is there a distinction in your mind?
Well, obviously there's a distinction, but he pretty much states in most cases. First of all, here's again where Barr misled the American people. He said there was no collusion. Collusion is a term that is not a legal term. The special prosecutor Mueller found, as you put on TV a little while ago, that there was plenty of evidence that the Russians intervened in the election to help Trump. There was plenty of evidence that the Trump campaign knew about that, and encouraged, and wanted it, and in fact knew about some of the WikiLeaks dumps of stolen information supplied by the Russians in advance. What he couldn't prove was that there was, beyond a reasonable doubt, was that there was a criminal conspiracy. Although in the one case, I do not understand why he didn't charge Don Jr. and others in that famous meeting with criminal conspiracy, because they were. He said that he didn't charge them because you couldn't prove that they willfully intended to commit a crime. Well, you don't have to prove that. All you have to prove for conspiracy is that they entered into a meeting of the minds to do something wrong and had one overt act. They entered into a meeting of the minds to attend the meeting, to get stolen material on Hillary. They went to the meeting. That's conspiracy right there.
They seem to also have another issue, and I'm curious if this is a flaw in our code, or is this the way the intended law was made, which is our campaign finance laws. One of the other reasons they declined is that he couldn't figure out how to value opposition research. They couldn't figure out how to value cyber material when looking at it through stolen property, the legal code that has to do with physical merchandise. It seems to me that Mueller was all but saying to Congress, hey, guys, your law, the way you wrote the campaign finance laws, stink.
Well, that may be, but I think it's a very conservative reading of the law, because certainly people are willing to pay a lot of money for opposition research. Just look at that so-called dossier that started out as opposition research against Trump, financed by some big Republican donor, and then when Trump became the nominee, they shifted the financing over to Hillary. So campaigns are willing to pay a lot of money for opposition research. But the key is here that Barr clearly misled the American people both on obstruction of justice, where there's plenty of evidence that there was obstruction laid out in the report. Yeah. He said that, and again, he didn't say there was no obstruction. He said we can't prove the negative because there's too much evidence for that, and we can't charge him because the Justice Department won't let us charge him. So we're not going to look for that evidence.
All right.
But let me just say, we have to get some of this. Is why we have to hear from Barr. We have to hear from Mueller. We have to hear from other people like Don McGahn, whom we're going to call. We have to get the entire report, including the redacted materials, so we can evaluate it, and so the American people can know what was going on and can make judgments.
Why you have all of this case of obstruction presented in the Mueller report, as you just stated. Some might ask, why haven't you opened an impeachment inquiry? Or, in fairness, is that what you're doing right now?
I don't think we're doing that. We may get to that. We may not. As I've said before, it is our job to go through all the evidence, to all the information we can get,
How much does the politics matter?
And to go where the evidence leads us. I'm sorry?
How much does the politics impact this? As you know, impeachment gets politicized, so you have a legal case that you believe this happens and you should do it, but the politics dictate something else. How much is that going to influence this decision?
I don't know. That'll come down the road when we see what we have.
Is this in Nancy Pelosi's hands?
Among others. She's not the only person. She's certainly the leader of the Democratic caucus. She's the Speaker of the House. It's partly her and partly a lot of other people. Do you think
this is impeachable?
Yeah, I do. I do think that this, if proven, which hasn't been proven yet, some of this would be impeachable, yes.
All right.
Obstruction of justice, if proven, would be impeachable.
And you're going to go about to see if you can prove it?
Well, we're going to see where the facts lead us.
All right. Congressman Gerald Nadler, Democrat from New York. Thanks for coming on and sharing your views, sir.
Thank you.
All right. One item worth noting before we go to break. The Mueller report validates most, not all, but most of the reporting done by major news organizations throughout this investigation. Many of the stories we were told that were fake news show up as reported in the Mueller report and confirmed by first-hand accounts. It's something worth considering the next time you hear someone use the phrase fake news so loosely. When we come back, did we just normalize a new political dark art, foreign interference in our elections? Stay with us. Welcome back, panelists here. Joshua Johnson, host of 1A on NPR, Amy Walter, national editor of the Cook Political Report, NBC News chief White House correspondent Hallie Jackson, and Jonah Goldberg, senior editor of National Review. Hallie, let me start with you.
Oh, boy.
One thing we don't have and will never get is a counter report from Rudy Giuliani or the lawyers. They don't want to put this out anymore, do they?
They had been, for weeks, we've been hearing that they probably would not do that, or we're going to wait until after the Mueller report was out to decide whether they would. And I think what you're seeing now, they want to do a couple of things. Turn the page, close the case, in their view, and muddy the waters. And I think the last 12 minutes that we saw with Rudy Giuliani and you did just that.
Let's talk about the two big things that I think came out of both interviews. First, on the Rudy Giuliani interview, Jonah Goldberg, which is the defense is anybody would have done it. So what with foreign interference?
Yeah, I think it's nonsense. But Rudy Giuliani is playing the spin cycle. I think Hallie's exactly right that, look, the Notre Dame fire was less than a week ago. That feels like it was in the Cretaceous period at this point. And they think that they can just punt out of the news cycle, old news. It was very effective for the Clintons back in the 90s. Mm-hmm. Just say, move on, which was also effective for the Clintons. And I think it might work, but I think he's opening a huge can of worms going forward that we're now legitimizing hacking in and of itself.
So that if a campaign in 2020, 2024, whatever, gets information from a foreign adversary that, according to Giuliani, was true, as long as what was hacked by a foreign government and given to you was true, then it's usable.
So everybody's going to have their own super PAC of foreign intelligence?
That is clear. As long as who am I to say?
Well, wait a second.
Who am I to say that that's
did Rudy Giuliani just signal the Russians, hey, help us now? Go find the Pete Buttigieg emails.
He may have, but the question that you asked before the break, are we normalizing this idea of foreign interference in our elections? No, none of us are. Rudy Giuliani is trying to. So this is why it is now incumbent on lawmakers, on presidential candidates, on people in the political sphere to make sure that that does not become acceptable, to Amy's point.
Also, Buttigieg's emails will be in Norwegian, so it's not a problem.
Let's go to what Gerald Nadler said, which is he does think these offenses are impeachable. Then, of course, he said the caveat, assuming that we prove obstruction true. Joshua, as you said, well, what part of the 448-page document did you not read?
Right. And I think he committed a little news there when you asked him that question with that deep, pregnant pause where he finally went, yeah, I do. 448 pages redacted that have laid out a great deal about the president.
In fairness, it was light redaction.
It was
fairly light.
Right, and the redactions were also noted in terms of why.
And they seem to be legitimate redactions in the moment. There's a lot of cases sitting out there.
But the reality is, we talk about politicizing the impeachment process. Impeachment is an inherently political process because all the people who are involved in the process are political appointees. They're members of Congress. So there's kind of no way to separate that. But the idea that Congress would walk away, to your point about Nancy Pelosi, that they would walk away as a matter of course from even considering impeachment, I think that's one of those things, as we get closer to the election, a lot of Democratic voters are going to be like, wait. Yeah. The Constitution says this is your job. Aren't you supposed to do this part of your job?
Are we headed for this? We already have a two-track world of bizarre worldviews where I felt like at times it was like Hannity talking points and in one place, and then you're in the reality of where we live here. But Jerry Nadler's going to have one investigation, and Lindsey Graham, Jonah Goldberg is going to have one on Peter Strzok. It's obvious Peter Strzok's going to be a star for the Republicans, regardless of whether, again, the dossier, all those things. They're not even relevant points in the actual investigation.
Also there is this investigation from the IG, and to defend the Republicans slightly on this one, I do think it is worth. You do have a big chunk of this country that thinks that this whole thing was launched for fraudulent reasons. It is worth informing the American people about the truth of that. Period. Right. At the same time, I'm one of these guys who I think the Mueller report basically confirms all of my positions, which is a common thing in Washington these days. I never thought that the hard case about Trump being a Putin puppet and all that kind of stuff was true. But we know that this reflects his character and that he was willing to collude and just didn't.
The most amazing thing, I want to put up the list of people that saved the president from obstructing.
Boy.
Look at the pictures of these people.
Yeah.
Because, Hallie, they all have one thing in common, whether it's Don McGahn, whether it's Rick Dearborn, Jeff Sessions, K.T. McFarland, James Comey, Rob Porter, Reince Priebus, and John Kelly. What's the one thing they all have in common, Hallie?
They gone.
That's right. No, everybody that stopped the president from his worst instincts, not there.
So the president, well, I think it says a lot about this administration and this West Wing. And I will say this, the president over the last 48 hours has been mounting this aggressive, I am living my best life PR campaign, PR strategy. That's not the case. Based on our reporting, I've been talking to sources just last night and yesterday morning who say he is furious. He's been watching the coverage. He's really mad at one of the guys in that picture, Don McGahn in particular.
The guy who saved him.
Correct.
Saved him from an impeachment proceeding and an actual probable objection
furious.
charge.
There is second guessing happening right now in the West Wing about why McGahn was allowed to sit for such a long time, for 30 hours with the special counsel.
Talk to John Dowd and Ty Cobb.
That's exactly right. Who said, open the door. If there's nothing to hide, get out there and talk about it. There's some relief in the West Wing that the ire from the president is not being directed at the people who are still there.
And the president's legal strategy of letting everybody participate got him out of a jam, and yet he still doesn't like what it did.
Well, the central theme, and really when you read the second volume of this report, it reads like a character novel, right? It lays out. It's a character
it's
study.
Michael Wolff's Fire and Fury, except written by Bob Mueller.
But it is. So for people who are thinking, I shouldn't read this, there's too much in it, actually read it because it gives you a very good sense of who this person is, and it comes down to one word: legitimacy. Yeah. That is what he is always worried about, and anything that questions his legitimacy is worth fighting back against.
By the way, kudos to who wrote the actual narrative. It is well written for a legal document.
It's like a lawyer with an English minor.
It is easy to read for the layperson. All right, when we come back, Joe Biden is launching his presidential campaign this week, and he's leading in the polls. But how significant are early polls for a frontrunner at this stage of a presidential campaign? We'll show you that next. Welcome back. Data download time. Former Vice President Joe Biden is expected to announce his presidential bid this week. He's ahead in the polls and has been for weeks. But history isn't always kind to the early frontrunners. At this point in the cycle, in April of 2007, Hillary Clinton was 10 points ahead of her party's eventual nominee and President Barack Obama. And in May of 2015, it was Jeb Bush who was on top, and Donald Trump was all the way at the back of the field. Of course, Democrats are still a long way away from choosing a nominee. But if you're Joe Biden, you have to hope at least this history does not repeat itself. When we come back, Endgame and the Democratic Party's new debate for the next few weeks over the issue of impeachment. Back now with Endgame. Check out the different responses you get from presidential candidates on the I word. Take a listen.
So I've been really careful about talking about what we would do if an impeachment came before us. First, I want to hear from Bob Mueller.
I'm focused on replacing him the old-fashioned way.
We should open proceedings in the House, and then the House can take a vote.
Joshua, it's interesting there. Kamala Harris says, I want to hear from Bob Mueller. It's like, first it was the report. What more do you need from Bob Mueller?
You got a ream of paper from Bob Mueller. Redacted, I know, redacted. But, I mean, here's the thing. We've heard enough. Like, enough. Can we just do the TV Guide version of this? If they can summarize an episode of Game of Thrones before every single show, we can summarize this report. The report says that the President of the United States engaged in behavior that, per one commentator, you could describe as lawful but awful, that the prosecutors did not have enough of the legal basis to press charges for constitutional and legal reasons, that the president is not exonerated from wrongdoing, and that now the power rests with Congress vis-a-vis the people to do something, if anything. That is the TV Guide's summary of what happened. If you need more information to know whether you're in or out, what game are you playing? Now, I'm not saying what the outcome should be, but at a certain point, you know, the light's green. Are you going to go or pull over?
Well, Mueller's grandkids still haven't testified yet.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think part of the...
there is this desire to have the aha moment, to have that Jack Nicholson, I ordered the code red, right? That is what folks are hoping to see, and that's never going to happen. And it's never going to happen. Bob Mueller's not going to say, I ordered the code.
But I think that's the value of the interview that you just gave. I know that interview felt like a rabbit hole with Rudy Giuliani, but I think that's the power of it because it allows the president leading into 2020 to still have a foil. Remember what Rudy Giuliani said, wouldn't you be upset too at someone who tried to frame you? And that, I think, is part of the political power of Donald Trump.
You have to accept that premise.
Yeah, but having a foil in D.C. gives the president something to talk about in the 2020.
So I'm old-fashioned about this. I find that all of the talk about this, about impeachment being a legalistic criminal matter, to be flawed. Basically, impeachment is about breach of trust with the public, and you can impeach anybody for anything. And impeachment doesn't mean conviction. It's the political equivalent of indictment.
Or recall, maybe.
Right, but I mean, the Senate will never remove. Right. To me, this is purely a political question. Do the Democrats think they can get enough votes? Is it in their political interests to do it? Will any Republicans go along? Will it be a Pyrrhic victory if it goes to the Senate and then it's not even taken up, which is possible? Or do they just say wait till the election? But it's a political question. Everyone's saying they're waiting for that one last smoking gun. It's a category error of taking legalistic stuff and applying it to politics.
Does Trump want an impeachment?
I was just going to say, you mind meld, Chuck, because to your point, he loves a foil. I'm told he's been telling friends and allies the phrase, well, hey, look at what happened to Republicans back during the Clinton impeachment era, and look what happened to Bill Clinton. So he is ready for a fight. He thinks it could actually help him with the people who support him.
Can I tell you, though, what's sitting out there that we haven't talked about, and I apologize to my control room because I'm going to ask for something, which is the 12 cases that none of us know. Okay?
Yeah.
12 transfers, and yes, we know. It's like, but these are unknown cases. These were stuff that fell outside the parameters of Russia. Here it is. 12 unknown cases. We know Michael Cohen. We know Greg Craig, where Mueller had to ship it off to another entity. These are little landmines that we don't know what they will explode when they explode. We know Israel and UAE and Saudi Arabia. There are all these other foreign entities that were involved in stories with, say, the Seychelles Islands. The report only dealt with Russia. There's more landmines out there for the president.
Although, do we think that any of those are going to change either the political or legal calculations for the president or those that we know immediately in his circle? To me, the question for Democrats, too, is about this. The same issue they have is what the president is worried about, too, legitimacy, right? That has framed this entire issue of Russia for him, that whatever has been done to him has been done to undermine the credibility of his win. And for Democrats, I think the legitimacy question is this. If we go down an impeachment path, are we then building this narrative for him? What a better legitimacy is to beat him in an election.
Vladimir Putin. It was the most successful campaign he could ever have imagined. Look what we're doing.
Through the Russian military. Yeah. I mean, it is frightening, the import of all this. And you're right, those other 12 matters are going to be very consequential. Could I just kind of pivot away and step back from the Beltway really quickly? It's Easter. It's Passover. Yes. It's a gorgeous day. I got a brand new Harley. I'm eager to go out and ride as soon as the show is over. I think for people who are watching this, take a breath. The system is designed to work through this.
We're all hoping the system works.
It will.
However it's supposed to work. That's all for today. And as Joshua said, thank you for watching here. We're wishing everybody a happy Easter, happy Passover, happy Harley ride. And we'll be back next week because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.